Welcome to the Midland Money Mindset. This is a podcast that's all about getting your mind right when it comes to all things money. In every episode, we go deep with engaging guests who provide tangible takeaways and a whole lot of joy along the way. I hope you enjoy these conversations as much as I enjoyed having them. Let's dive into today's show. Well, I am super excited today for our guest, Shukri Wrights. He's a sports radio host, podcast host, broadcaster, and commentator. And as you all know, I love talking sports, especially hockey. And Shukri, similarly to me, is a big hockey fan. So we're going to be talking a lot of hockey and just a lot of business entrepreneurialism as we normally talk about. So welcome to the show, Shukri.
It's good to be here with you on the Milton Money Mindset podcast. So I appreciate you having me on. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So Shukri, I know a bunch about you, but I'm always enamored by how people get and end up where they are. So we're going to spend a lot of time on what you're doing today, but perhaps you could give our listeners like a 10,000-foot view of, who you are and what brought you to the point of where you are today.
It's a great question because like people tend to see maybe a small snippet of what I do online, but don't really know like who I am. My name is Shukri Wrights. I am someone who is very ambitious, very driven, very passionate. I am someone who like really enjoys like talking sports, being able to like cover sports and talk to different people and interact with different people and so forth. And one thing about me is that I take a great deal of pride in in just being able to converse and talk about different topics and give people like a bit of an idea as to like what makes me tick, what makes me go, what makes me like excited and so forth. And I think that there's always a story to a person, especially when you're meeting them for the first time. And I can't wait to be able to share with you like my story with you here in the pod.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So, I mean, when did you start falling in love with sports? When that happened?
So I was born and raised in New York, and I grew up in a time where in New York City in the 90s, like the Yankees were truly the kings of the city. It was truly a magical time in New York where like the expectation was just so incredible and it was enormous. And we're talking about this is the number one media market in the world. And me as a kid growing up in Brooklyn at that time, this is now late 90s. So those of you that are from New York can understand exactly what I'm about to say. It really was a time where it was expected that the Yankees were going to be in the World Series every year. And they oftentimes did during that 5-year stretch where it was World Series or bust. And it just felt like that team was going to win every single year. And even though the baseball season was long, I fell in love with just being able to just listen to them like on the radio, whether it was passing or passing by on TVs in the city. And I grew up, like my first love was baseball, and it may surprise a lot of people because when people now go on social media and they see the content that I create, it's primarily hockey. It's hockey, Bruins hockey, and whatnot. But the truth is that I grew up a baseball fan. I grew up loving the Yankees. I grew up being enamored with the sport of baseball. And in the 90s, like it really was like just a joy to be able to, watch that team like from a very young age. I fell in love with baseball at the age of 7. And like from that point on, just being able to get a better understanding of the sport as I continue to get older, as I enter my adolescent years as well.
And what caused the shift into the hockey side of the equation? So you get started with with the Yankees and baseball, and you said, you were enamored by that sport. And now today, predominantly much of what you're talking about is hockey related. So when did that shift take place?
It's a great question because like if you told me in 1999 that I would become like enamored, borderline obsessed with hockey in general, let alone the Boston Bruins, I would have looked at you like you're crazy. There's no way in hell. Like, but I did from a young age begin to like kind of wander towards hockey a little bit, like especially when I was like 10, 11 years old, and like I didn't know much about the sport then. I'm gonna be honest with you, I didn't, but I would just watch because at that time, like in New York City, you have 3 teams that play within the New York metropolitan area. That's the Rangers, obviously, they play in Manhattan MSG. You have the Islanders that play in Long Island, and then you have the New Jersey Devils, whom at the time they were playing at the Meadowlands, which is just about like 8-9 miles outside of the city, and now currently playing in Newark. So during that time, like the Devils, like were the team that were having like a great deal of success. The Rangers, this was their dark ages in the late '90s.
Right.
I mean, even though they had like they had Wayne Gretzky towards the end of his career, but it was a time where like I paid attention to the stars like Scott Stevens, like Marty Brodeur I knew about, Ken Danica, who I had the honor and the privilege of having on my personal podcast back in 2021, and like so that's when my eyes started to shift into us learning about the sport, like the different intricacies, like why was it so fast, what made it so violent. It was a combination of things where like from a young age I was like, man, this is the fastest sport on ice, and yet these skates were like sharp enough to actually like do serious harm to someone.
Sure.
So it was really a combination of wanting to learn more about hockey, learning about like the culture, and as well as like what goes into it and what makes it truly such a special sport to watch.
Yeah. So I have to ask this, right? Native New Yorker, you talk about even, the New York teams, Rangers, Islanders, even the Devils are fairly close. How do you end up becoming a Bruins fan of all hockey fans?
It's a good question because to tell you the truth, like I really started getting into like hockey, like especially like high school was really where I started to like really make it a point to watch the games even more. I can remember like during a time when I was in high school where like if you had cable, you had NHL Center Ice, they would have these previews they would do twice a season where they do at the beginning, maybe the first week of the season, and then like shortly after like the All-Star break, and like you get to watch these out of market teams. The Bruins were one of those out of market teams. So for me, it was, I gotta go back now. This is like 06, 07. I could remember like seeing this massive behemoth of a man on like playing hockey, and I was like, yo, who the hell is this guy who should be like a basketball player? And it turned out that was Zdeno Chara, and I was like, oh, that man is huge. Okay.
Who was drafted by the Islanders, by the way.
Drafted by the Islanders originally, in 1996, and it was comical to me. I was like, man, a man that large can play hockey? Wow. Okay. And then I learned a little later on, shortly, about Patrice Bergeron. Unfortunately, not through the best of circumstances. After he had that serious concussion, after he took that hit from Jones against the Flyers in 2007. That's when I first learned about Bergeron and what he means to the Bruins. But it was from there I started watching them more, and especially the more that the Bruins we feature on national television, because I'm sure you remember, and those of you that are of age remember, like at that time, NBC and Versus, which later became NBC Sports Network, they were the national carriers of the NHL. So I would watch watch that team and watch other teams around the league around that time, and like the Bruins just really captured caught my eye and really captured my heart.
Amazing. I mean, now it used to be a lot easier to find a hockey game on any given day. Now you have to basically go in and look it up because it could be on 9 different channels. It's crazy.
True.
I think that's one of the biggest fails that the NHL has had in recent times is the fact that they're not making it easy for us to find those events, to catch fans like you and convert you from baseball to hockey. It's a part-time job to figure out where your team's playing on any given night. It's tough.
It's about accessibility, and I think that itself is huge. And I think because of the different options you have now, it kind of makes it harder for like, especially in the States, to be able to find like where your team is going to be playing. And unless you are a one that loves to pay attention to like media and like networks and so forth and broadcasting schedules, like you have to be able to like go and actively search, like, okay, are they locally on Nesson if you watch a bunch of Bruins, if you are a Ranger fan, if you want to watch it on MSG, or like if you want to watch a national game, like find out what network are they on, the NHL network and so forth. So I think it comes down to like just having that keen of an eye and an ear and paying attention to like what channel are they on and where can I find it and so forth. And so like, yeah, I absolutely get it. I think accessibility is a major key, and something that I think like the NHL can do a lot better on in terms of make the game a lot more accessible.
Yeah, I agree. So you mentioned it earlier. You mentioned your podcast, right? So what was the impetus? What was the intention behind launching the Shukri Wrights podcast? What are you looking to do there? You mentioned, I think it was Ken Danico you had a couple of years ago on the show. What's the impetus behind that, and what type of show is it about?
That's a good question, because like when I first started the Shukri Wrights podcast, it was something that I initially didn't intend to do. I didn't. In March of 2020, which is now exactly 4 years ago, as we all know and remember, like the world began to shut down, and it shut down because of the COVID-19 pandemic, which was an unprecedented global pandemic that we had never seen. And someone gave me a really great idea, and it was an idea that I didn't really think much of before, to tell you the truth. And I remember at that time, this is now March of 2020. I want to peel the curtain back a little bit. In March of 2020, this is now March 11th. We all find out about the news about Rudy Gobert of the Utah Jazz at the time, who tested positive for the coronavirus. And at that point, we still don't know a whole lot about it, but we knew it was serious enough for the NBA to halt all sorts of activity, suspending the games, the operations, everything. And I remember actually being on my way to TD Garden to work an extra shift that night, and just sharing the news with my coworkers, and they were just like, they just literally laughed it off. They literally laughed it off. And I just remember, like, guys, I don't think this is a laughing matter. The NBA is suspending its season indefinitely. So I remember the next day, this is now March 12th, this is a Thursday. I remember just getting an email saying that, hey, like, we have availability to to do a radio show and so forth. And I jumped on it, and I knew that this was serious, considering that the NBA has suspended its season indefinitely and everything else. So I did a 2-hour radio show that day, and I still think that in itself was the most impactful radio show that I've ever did, in terms of in real time having to break the news that the NHL was suspending its season indefinitely. Major League Baseball was stopping spring training and suspending its season indefinitely. Obviously, the NFL was in its off season, so the NFL wasn't really a thought just yet, but there was concerns. So I just remember after that show walking through the West End section of Boston at that time, and I got an email from the program director saying that, hey, we're going to be shutting down the station indefinitely. And the last day of operations in studio was going to be March 13th. It was Friday, March 13th. And I'll never forget it. So I go in the studio and I do the radio show for an hour. I had people who called in and just offer their support. It was just unbelievable. And I just remember just thinking, man, I don't know what I'm gonna do now. There's no radio. What am I going to do to, continue to put my voice out there and so forth? And someone recommended that, hey, you should do a podcast. And actually not long after I did the podcast, I did start inviting guests to talk on the podcast. Some of the most notable names, either in sports media, broadcasting, former athletes on the pod, just to have conversations, ask about their careers, and just have a general conversation with people. And that's how the podcast began, and that's how I was able to slowly but surely start to build a platform that I have in terms of the podcasting and so forth. And later, about a couple months later, I didn't know it at the time. That podcast, to an extent, would actually become even more meaningful.
In what way? How was that?
In two ways. The first one was one, George Floyd was murdered in May of 2020, and it was just almost 4 years ago. And at that time, I was very angry. I was very very sad, angry, frustrated, a lot of different emotions. And I just remember doing an episode with a former NHL player by the name of Patrick O'Sullivan, who came on the pod, and I'll never forget it. And I think to this day, I think that is one of the top 5 or top 6 most played episodes in the Shukri Wrights podcast's history. And I remember him asking me, like, how are you? And it wasn't like the casual, how are you doing? Like, no, like, how are you?
Right.
I'll never forget it. And I was just
really are.
It was just like, it made me think, like, man, okay, you asked me how am I? I'm gonna tell you how am I, honestly. And I gave him an answer back then. And then shortly after, I started having like my battles with anxiety, and it was because like shortly after like the George Floyd, like the Black Lives Matter protests that were happening, not just only in Boston but nationally, all like worldwide, nationally, and so forth. As when I started dealing with anxiety, and I started using my podcast as a way to like share with people, of what I was dealing with in terms of like my mental health. And obviously at that time, like, we're still in the midst of a global pandemic, and we didn't have the ability to do as many things that we would like to have done socially and so forth. But the podcast in itself allowed me to be able to talk to people, to be able to like converse with people, and to share with them like what was happening, like my thoughts and everything else. So like that was basically how the Shukri Wrights podcast basically became more meaningful to me personally, especially in the summer of 2020.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. I appreciate the candor in regards to mental health, because I think that's so important. We talk a lot about the three legs of the stool: financial health, physical health, and mental health. And if you're struggling or not full tilt on one of those areas, it's very challenging. And I think it's a testament to you and others who are speaking about their own mental health, because it makes others feel more comfortable about speaking about it. So you're doing a lot of good, and I appreciate you for that. So let's turn this over to you a little bit more about your life, because one thing I've heard you say is, your life's path has been filled with risk. What do you mean by that, and what can others learn from the power of taking risks? I mean, we have a lot of entrepreneurs listening to this, so they're not unfamiliar with risks, right? There's risks in just about everything they do from a business standpoint. There's pros and cons. But what did you mean from that, and what can others learn from your power of taking risks?
That's a phenomenal question, because I am a firm believer that you have to take risk in life in order to achieve anything, and it's not even just limited to just sports media, just anything. You want to grow or begin a business, there's a risk involved. You want to buy a house, there's some level of risk involved.
Sure.
Like you want to start a family, it's a blessing, but there's also some sort of risk involved. Even waking up in the morning, there is risk involved. Like it sounds funny, but you really think about it, like, no, actually he's got a point. Like there is risk involved. There's no such thing as a risk-free life. That doesn't exist. And the thing for me in terms of my journey that I've learned, and this goes back a number of years, not just within the last few months, but a number of years now, is that I have to go back almost 10 years ago now. And I reflect on this because 10 years ago, if you told me that I was going to be moving to Boston and making a big name for myself, I would have laughed at you and I would have like, you're crazy. There's no way in hell, because Boston was not even anywhere near my conscience at all.
Right.
I'm a grad student in college in the spring of 2014. And I'm thinking, well, I know what I want to do. I've always wanted to get into sports media. I've always wanted to get into broadcasting and so forth. But what's amazing is that when I think back on it, is 2 years prior, before the first time I went to Boston, 2 years prior, my father, who I told him this before, he unknowingly planted the biggest seed into me in terms of my love for radio. Because like in terms of that aspect, when I was a kid, I grew up, as I mentioned, I grew up in New York, but my first introduction to radio wasn't through sports. It was actually through news.
Mm-hmm.
I was listening to Tintin Wins every morning in the 90s, like as I eat breakfast with my little sister and my mom, helping getting ready for the day. And I remember years later, in April 2012, my father, he gave me some really poignant advice that at the time I just didn't know how it was going to manifest itself. And he said, you know, if you want to get started in sports media, you're going to have to leave New York. Mm-hmm. And it hit me. And I was like, wow, okay, because you have no professional experience. You have little to no experience at this point. So if you want to build a name for yourself or make a name for yourself, you have to leave New York to at least start. And I just remember at the time thinking, okay, what would that look like? I have no idea. Was Boston in the forefront of my mind? No. Was I looking into other cities? Yeah, but I'm in college at this point. I'm like, well, what am I going to do post-graduation? I have no idea. And it's funny because 2 years later, and this brings me back to 10 years ago now, I go to Boston for the first time on a visit, and that in itself is for another day. And that visit opened my eyes and opened my heart to like realizing that I'm a native New Yorker, but throw that out for a moment. There's something different about this city in comparison to other major cities that I have visited in my life up until that point. And I said to myself, after I walked around the entire circumference outside of Fenway Park, from Lansdowne all the way around to Jersey Street and so forth, and I said to myself, I want to come back to Boston. I want to come back to Boston, and I did. So fast forward through 2015, I visited Boston a lot, quite frequently throughout the summer of 2015. And I knew in August of 2015 that Boston had really captured my heart. The city, the candor, the people, the personality, everything. It captured my heart. And I'm on the bus talking with my best friend. And her and I were talking, and she asked me a question that, and I told us, like, it actually changed my life. And she was like, have you ever maybe thought about maybe moving to Boston? And it clicked. It clicked then. That's like, this is where I actually want to be. And I knew in my heart of hearts that this is what I want for myself. If at that point, I'm not post undergrad, and I want to, get out, move away from the nest, so to speak. And for anyone that's out there, you can relate to that. You move out your parents for the first time in your life. You want to spread your wings a bit.
Yeah.
For me, it was Boston. It wasn't even close. And I just remember thinking, well, it can't possibly be that hard, right? I had no idea like the journey that it would take, like that 1.5 year journey just to move to Boston, like learning the ins and outs of the city, learning like the realities of the city, and like where to live and working. I knew I wanted to work in sports media, but again, I had no real on-air experience. I had almost nothing to my name, with the exception of an internship that really opened my eyes to the sports media industry that I did in the spring of, not spring, but the fall of 2015 at ESPN New York, which still holds a very special place in my heart. That it opened my eyes to sports media, but it made me realize that, man, I'm going to have to work hard. So I'm going to have to work hard to get into sports media. I'm going to have to really work at, making the move to Boston. Man, what am I going to do? Like, the easy thing for me would have been just say, you know what? This is too hard. I'm just going to try to take the easier path.
Sure.
But I'll be honest with you, I was stubborn. And I'm still stubborn to this day, in a sense that I'm stubborn for what I'm passionate about. And so all of 2016, I'm visiting Boston. I'm angry with myself because I want to be living in Boston already. And I'm just like, man, darn it. I should be living here already.
Right.
But there was a moment in August of 2016, that summer, that I strongly believe it did change my life. I strongly believe it even to this moment as we're recording this podcast. And the moment was, I had just finished praying. I'm Muslim, by the way. I just finished praying my ass prayer. And an idea came to me, and it was basically, go in the room, grab a spiral notebook. I want you to write down everything you want to accomplish in these next 6 months, if not a little longer, but 6 months to start. I'll never forget it. I sat in the room for well over an hour. I'm writing everything down. Plan A was to move to Boston, January of 2017. Plan B, move to Boston, February of 2017. Plan C, move to Boston, spring of 2017. Plan D, move to Boston, summer 2017. So as you can tell, I was hell-bent on moving to Boston. Like, it was not even a question of when. It was, okay, how? So at this point, I knew that because of the experiences that I needed to go through in order to, before I can even get to that point, I needed to make sure that I was fully in. And that's the other part of it. If you're going to commit yourself to a plan or a dream or a goal, you have to make sure that you are fully in. You're fully invested. You can't half behind it. If you half behind it, you already lost 75% of the battle there.
Right.
You have to make sure that you're truly invested from your mind, your heart, your spirit, and it may hurt you financially a little bit, but that's where the risk comes in. So now, fall of 2016, I've left New York for good, and I'm living in Philly at this point, and I'm commuting to Philly to New York Monday through Friday. My days would start at 3:30 in the morning. That's not an exaggeration at all, ladies and gentlemen.
Right.
3:30 in the morning, my days would start. I would turn around and get to New York, wee hours in the morning, go to work, come back Monday through Friday. I pick up a second job, working valet at a hospital locally here in Philadelphia on weekends. And I remember being told the shifts were from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., Saturday, Sundays. And I was like, whoo, goodbye, social life.
Right.
Hello, goals and ambitions.
Right.
So literally, I said goodbye to my social life for a good 4.5 months. I had no social life at all, unless if I snuck in like a day where I took the day off. Like, but outside of that, no social life.
Right.
It was work,
Yeah.
work in New York, commuting to New
But
York,
you
and
had those
back.
goals, right? You had those goals
It was
wanted
gonna,
to accomplish.
it was gonna happen regardless. And I'm sharing this story in full because I'm not gonna like shortchange it. I want people to see like and realize that if you're going to invest yourself into taking risk, you have to be in it. And
Right.
I went to work 7 days a week, didn't have a day off. Was it hard? Yeah, it was hard. I was burned out by the time I got to November. And when I got to November, one Sunday night, I got home and I'm just like, man, I'm tired. I'm tired. My best friend is on the phone and she's like, remember why you're doing this, Shu? And I was like, yeah,
Remember the why.
right. And then that was all she wrote. And then about a month later, I get a call or email from GBH for a canvassing opportunity in Boston. And I was like, oh my God, like I got an interview for a job opportunity in Boston. So this is now Christmas week of 2016. And I go up to Boston during that entire week. I was off from my Monday to Friday job in New York. And I interviewed for the job. They offered me the job. And I'm thinking, well, man, here we go. It's really happening now. I got the job and I'm going to make this work. So to move a little bit ahead in the story, I ended up making the move to Boston in February 2017. And you would think that, well, that's where the story begins. Nope.
Right.
Not a chance. So from the time I moved to Boston in February 2017 to June of 2019, it took me 2.5 years. 2.5 years before I was finally able to even begin to build or get my feet wet in radio.
Right.
Like when I moved to Boston, I worked at WGBH, and that was very short lived. I worked as a desk concierge at a Hotel Indigo at my TD Garden in Boston. That was short lived, and through that, after that I went through struggles of not being able to get a full-time job. I was able to get a part-time job, but I had to find a way to make ends meet. It was hard. It was challenging, and I knew what I wanted to do, but I just didn't know how to be able to go forward. So for me, I'm a big believer that you meet people for a reason. You don't meet people by accident.
Right.
I'm a very strong believer in that. And I'm gonna give you an actual example. I mentioned it took me 2.5 years before I finally got my first opportunity to do radio, which I was my own radio show for a number of years at WMFO. Before then, it's now April of 2019. I'm dating this woman at that time. This is right around the same time the Bruins were in the first round of against the Toronto Maple Leafs. It was a Saturday. And I remember this drive back from New Hampshire very, very vividly. I was angry. I was very angry because I wasn't doing what I wanted to do. And I thought it was going to be a lot easier than what it really is. And those that are in sports media know that it is a grind. You gotta really work hard to even build a name for yourself and then ultimately get your foot in the door. So I'm in the car and I'm making my way back from New Hampshire with the woman who I was dating at the time, and she was asking me why are you angry? And I shared with her what was going on, and there was one thing that she said, and it stayed with me. It stayed with me to this day. If you are serious about what you want to do, ultimately in sports media, you have to reach out to people that are doing what you want to do. Mm-hmm. And this could apply to anything in life. If you are an entrepreneur and if you want to become successful at it, reach out to the people who are already successful at it. Mm-hmm. You have to be willing to, and this is the other part of it too. You have to be willing to swallow your pride. Because oftentimes our ego would be the biggest cause of our own demise. Swallow your pride and reach out and say, hey, I don't know what I'm doing. I would like to get your insight or your advice on any way or anyhow that I can become more successful. And that's what I did.
Yeah.
And that advice ultimately led to me being able to find WMFO 91.5 FM and be able to start my own radio show in July of 2019.
Amazing. So many great takeaways in there, Shukri. And yeah, I mean, you have to go through sometimes those challenges in order to get where you need to do and stay focused. And it's a test many times. So, one of the things I wanted to ask you, because I do not have this ability, but you do. Sure. Have you always had the ability to just remember sports stats? Because I don't even have, like, people talk to me about, I'm a big Ranger fan. People talk to me about the Rangers and they can recite what happened in 1990, whatever. And that's not something that I can recall, but it seems like it comes very easily for you. Is that something that's always been, in your wheelhouse?
I would say no. I don't think it always was. I think it stems from the fact that, like, I love history. What people don't know about me is, like, I love history. I've always been enamored with world history at that. Global history, World War I, World War II, U.S. history. And, with history, you have to be able to remember, like, dates.
Right.
And I would say sometimes numbers too, to a lesser extent. So for me, it was a matter of being able to remember dates and then ultimately, like, try to remember numbers. I wouldn't say that I was born with that ability. I don't think it was. I think it was, like, kind of harnessed through, like, my love for history and as it turned, like, into sports. I do think that I had to make it a point to, like, take time and read,
hone the skill.
Articles. Like, right, you had to read articles. You got to be willing to read, like, magazines and especially in the digital age, like, we have access, like, to the internet, like,
right,
read up on things. So I think for me, it was just a matter of just taking the time and just reading and using those, like, numbers or stats as antidotes to whatever point that I'm making, whether if it was on a podcast or, like, on radio and so forth. And I think that it also goes back to, just finding, like, little things that you can always add to your repertoire or always get better at as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that, Shukri. And, we're all about joy here on the Midland Money Mindset. So we end each of our shows by asking our guests the same final question. I'm going to do the same to you today. And that is, what did you do today that brought you joy and put you in the right mindset for success?
Worrying doesn't solve anything. That in itself, I would say, is something I'm trying to work on and practice every single day, especially now, given that that we're all living in very uncertain times. I mean, it's just the truth. But worrying, stressing, it doesn't solve anything. In fact, my sister, gave me this really great this quote, and this saying is the truth. She said, worrying doesn't solve anything, but worrying will send you to an early grave.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to pause and really think about that. I was like, you're right. Because what has worrying solved? Nothing. Has worrying ever solved anything in the history of mankind? No, it never has.
Right.
So I think for me, just taking that and applying it into my personal life, like worrying about things or how things will turn out, it's not going to do me or anybody any sort of good, but rather using that and shifting that into saying, hey, you know what? I see what the problem is. I know what I need to do. So I'm going to actively choose to do my best to do better, to make the right choices and the right decisions every single day. That's going to give me a different outcome. So I would say for sure, like learning and actively learning, like not to worry about things, is something that has brought me joy today.
Yeah, thank you very much for sharing that. And Listen, I'd be remiss if I don't ask you this like final question. And this show probably will not be airing till we're far into the playoffs. But the question is, who do you think is going to take the Stanley Cup this year in the 23-24 season? Put you right on the spot.
It's a good question. Right now, man, like Florida just looks like the team. The Florida Panthers are like a team that is like on a mission. Like they really look like a team that could really do some serious damage come on the Stanley Cup playoffs. But the beauty of the Stanley Cup playoffs is that anything can happen.
Right.
So you asking me like who do I think can potentially win the Stanley Cup this spring? It could very well be the Florida Panthers. I think they are the team that could ultimately hoist the cup this coming spring.
Well, let's see what happens. And listen, Shukri, it's been a pleasure having you on the show, and we're going to have all of your information in the show notes. But if people want to learn more about you, what you're doing, want to connect with you, what's the easiest and the best place for them to do that?
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to be on the Milton Money Mindset podcast. Thank you for having me on. On media, you can find me at Shukri Wrights on Twitter and TikTok. Same handle, Shukri Wrights. On Instagram, you can find me at @SWrightsRadio_. That's how you can find me on social media as well.
Awesome. Well, listen, thank you so much for taking out the time. It's been a pleasure spending the last 30, 40 minutes with you, and enjoy the day.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you for having me on.